Well, both Washington and Pyongyang ramp up the rhetoric. Can a diplomatic resolution be found at this point? We're joined by Stephan Haggard. He's director of the Korea Pacific Program and professor at UC San Diego. Always a pleasure having you on the broadcast. Stephan, in an interview in April, you said this: for Beijing, the challenge is to take more risk in pressuring North Korea. That is clearly what the Trump administration would like to see. But China wants to see a U.S. that's more flexible in negotiating with North Korea. Unless those two pieces come together, you said you were concerned that we were headed toward military options that carry very high risk. Seems prophetic now. Talk to us about your level of concern as this back and forth continues.
Well, I certainly think that the president's recent comments are not particularly useful. We were on a track earlier that was outlined by Secretary Tillerson that involved a combination of pressure on North Korea. China's been actually very helpful in that regard at the UN Security Council. But at the same time, Secretary Tillerson outlined that the United States didn't seek regime change in North Korea or unification, or didn't seek to place troops above the 38th parallel. So sending assurances, I think, both to Beijing and to Pyongyang. But now it seems like he's gone a little bit off script, and he's managed to escalate the conflict partly as a result of his own words.
Well, you mentioned what Tillerson said. That it seems like a lifetime ago, but it was just August 1st. And he also said we'd like to sit down and have a dialogue about the future. But now you have a U.S. president who slammed former President Clinton, Presidents Bush and Obama when it came to negotiations. That doesn't make it easier to get both sides at the negotiating table, does it?
No, I agree completely. But on the other hand, we also do have to remember that the underlying problem here is North Korea. And regardless of some of this confusion within the administration, that U.S. policy has been driven by a new anxiety about what's happening with respect to North Korean capabilities. We had evidence now that obviously the missile technology has advanced to the point where they can strike the American homeland. But the big development over the last several weeks is an intelligence community assessment that they've actually miniaturized a nuclear weapon, which means that they basically have a nuclear weapon that can strike the United States. So you can imagine why the United States would be quite concerned about that and would be emphasizing these defensive options, as it is with THAAD in South Korea.
China's put forth a plan to de-escalate things. Do you think that plan can actually go anywhere?
Well, I'm certainly hoping so, frankly. And even though China has done a lot now on the sanction side with this recent resolution, we'd like to see them outline exactly how they see these talks advancing. For example, they've proposed an idea in which the North Koreans would suspend their nuclear and missile testing and the United States would suspend exercises. But we still don't have any assurances that the North Koreans would then come to the negotiating table. So even though I think that could be a potential good step, we need Pyongyang. We currently have an empty chair.
You also said in a recent piece that the U.S. needs to credibly promise to engage and make horse trades. And you asked, what do we expect North Korea to do if there is no off-ramp? Do you see an off-ramp being created at any point by some of the fiery rhetoric that we're seeing coming from the White House?
No, and that's exactly my concern. I think that the assumption of the Trump administration, or probably the president himself, more than Secretaries Tillerson and Mattis, is that if you push the North Koreans, they're going to capitulate. But we have exactly the opposite record, which is when you push the North Koreans, Kim Jong-un doesn't want to be seen as capitulating. And in fact, that's part of why you see this militaristic response. So I just don't see it as being useful for moving the process forward.
Stephan, I don't see this as likely, but if Donald Trump were to pick up the phone and call you for advice, what kind of advice would you give him?
I think that he had a win over the weekend with the UN Security Council resolution. I think he can take these concerns to the Chinese privately, but I just don't see this war of words as being positive. I think he should let the secretaries, his secretaries, and particularly Secretary Tillerson, who's really been leading this effort, take charge of the situation and try to move the process forward. I have to say, I'm not particularly sanguine that those efforts will be successful. And I can imagine circumstances in which the United States would feel it has to respond militarily. But obviously, we want the diplomatic process to move forward if possible.
Stephan Haggard joining us from California. Thanks so much.